seems to me it's fair game to satirize a public figure, but not to attack their children or their families. And actually, I think probably the satire stops the moment they leave public office. So the same would be true of Richard Sharp or Stella Creasy. The Guardian fell foul of Rowson's pig and the panoply of anti-Semitic symbols, the coin, the squid, though not, I think, the muck on which Johnson sat or sank. There's so much of that cartoon that I reflect on that is just wrong. Why was Sharp, for example, carrying a Goldman Sachs box and not a BBC box? He'd just been sacked from the BBC. Surely there's a thesaurus of anti-Semitic imagery, from the Fagin sneer to the Alec Guinness nose, and the posture, all of which these images might pass on their own in other context, but altogether, and particularly with the pig in the background, tells us that Diane Abbott is wrong to dismiss anti-Semitism as something that doesn't exist. It's about thoughtless behaviour. It's about thoughtless racism, the same sort of thoughtless racism that infects humour and that should make us sit up. It's the same thoughtless racism that I identified with Coburn's attack on Humza Yousaf back in 2015 or whenever it was. There's a fine line to be drawn between invective and the invasion of privacy, but there's no fine line to be drawn between humour and anti-Semitism. It's very clear. It's as clear as day to me, and it's not impossible, I think, to self-police and to promote a clarity about these things. Sharp, for example, is a figure of national interest, and neither he nor Starmer nor Sunak nor Nadine Dorries nor Priti Patel nor Suella Braverman nor indeed Creasy should be beyond scrutiny, satire, and the call to explain their behaviour in public office, while they retain public office, and while they impact on our lives in such an extraordinary way. But it doesn't extend to their children. And similarly, the dichotomy between what we say in public, and what these statesmen and women say. Pat Cullen is quite right to call out the Secretary of State, Steve Barclay, to be more respectful of nurses who are striking while the NHS is in crisis, while 7 million people wait for operations, and similarly other ministers feel above negotiating, because that is his job. We are not bound by these same rules to be as respectful of him. In fact, we should pour scorn on him, because that is our job. But our job would be wrong if we then poured scorn on his children. His children have done nothing. His children are not in public office. His children are nothing to do with this. And, it's a matter of having respect. Now, I think anybody in the public eye should be able to negotiate their way from one position to the other. And people in public office should have respect for those people who are working around them. Otherwise, it is bullying. Otherwise, it is impossible to sort out our lives. There was a report today on BBC Radio 4's World at One, where Nick Hume, the chief executive of East Suffolk and North Essex NHS, in fact, I know him. He talked about the exemption that he'd got from the Royal College of Nurses, so that he was allowed to ask the nurses to come into cover emergency care, not to the staffing levels that they normally have, but to safe staffing levels. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible. And so, it's and so he's transferred patients elsewhere. I don't think it's ideal, and I think a better conversation could have been had, particularly given the fact that we're in the 21st century, and given the fact that strikes are there for a purpose. What is the purpose of a strike? What is the purpose of a protest, a march down the street? The purpose of these things is to draw attention to the problem. In the 21st century, we have other machinery for doing exactly that. I think the problem is well established. So it's now up to the people who are in charge of these unions to find a way to get people properly around a negotiating table. Yes, of course, there's a rejection. Yes, of course, there's an attempt by the current government to block so many of the older forms of legal resistance, of legal protest. But there are new forms of protest that they haven't thought of, and new forms of protest and new forms of engagement that the 21st century offers, particularly on the internet, particularly through the immediacy of the contact that workers can have with the wider public, and indeed that they can have with ministers and with the people who are running NHS trusts, with the people who are running railways, with the people who are running schools. There is an immediacy that we ought to be able to seize. We should be more creative in the ways that we engage, and this engagement should be more proactive. I think Steve Barclay and his like are as much in the past, are as locked in the 1950s and 1960s, as indeed are some of the trade unionists who are calling everybody out on strike. In the end, an aggressive government is going to make it almost impossible to call everybody out. It's going to make it almost impossible to have a protest march. And we haven't moved beyond that point. We should. Because our purpose is to engage and to negotiate. Our tools, the machinery for getting to that point, used to be the strike and the protest march. Today, I think it can be something else. We just need to think more creatively. And equally, we need to be more careful, I think, about our targets. We need to make sure the people who are in authority are constantly under the magnifying glass of journalists, of political commentators, of satirists. They need to be held to account, and they must not be let off. And Stella Creasy is raising something important, and that's the boundaries. There are boundaries. But yes, every time we press the television, and we chance upon GB TV, GB News, or Talk TV, and we see a politician who should be working in Parliament parading on the media, they should be lampooned until they leave. Lampooned until they leave, because they are not doing their job.